Hey there, thanks for tuning into Duck Bricks. I'm Chris, and the release of Avatar: The Way of Water is imminent, and so it is time to kick off a review series of all of the 4 core LEGO Avatar sets coinciding with the very first movie before the second one comes out in theaters. Now, I am very excited to do this because Avatar is a license that LEGO just recently got, but absolutely has been doing justice with some of the most interesting sets we've seen in quite some time, and so over the course of the next few weeks, we will be going through every single one of the LEGO Avatar sets, starting off with set number 75571, Neytiri and Thanator versus AMP suit Quaritch. This is the smallest of the mainline minifigure scale Avatar sets, but packs quite an interesting punch in terms of having a battle in the set itself, a creature, a mech, and some foliage and scenery. There's a lot of cool stuff to see here, so I can't wait to get right into the review. And of course, all of this will be leading to a massive Avatar mega review. So after all these reviews come out, definitely stay tuned, because there will be a massive mega review on the entire wave as a whole. And so without further ado, let's jump right into the review. Alright, so here we have Neytiri and Thanator versus AMP suit Quaritch. This set retails for $45 and comes with an environment build, the AMP mech suit itself, as well as a creature build plus 2 different minifigures, one of them being Quaritch, the soldier who's basically a standard type of LEGO minifigure, and the other being Neytiri, who is using these specialized limbs and long legs that were introduced for Woody of Toy Story back in 2011, and now are being used for pretty much every single one of the Avatar characters. This is the smallest set of the entire wave despite being $45, and presents a small slice of life into what you would come to expect out of some of the Avatar sets, from a creature to some sort of military-like vehicle to some nice nature, and the best thing is, the nature pieces can actually connect to each other, which we'll be talking about when we actually get to the part when we actually combine every single set. So, taking a look at these set's components by themselves, we'll start off by just first looking at the buildable parts themselves, and then we'll take a look at the minifigures later on. So let's just set all of these aside after we did the quick turnaround of the model itself. Thankfully, this is a pretty sturdy build, so you can really just move it around however you want, but then let's just start off here with the foliage, because honestly, that's one of the big draws to pretty much every single one of the Avatar sets. Removing the Thanator figure here, you may notice that this is actually a fairly open space. You pretty much just have A brackets, which can be moved around. I mean, technically it is supposed to be just one chunk, but this is the chunk that you're getting here. One of my favorite things about the Avatar sets is that they actually are pretty location-based, and even if these sets focus on, say, a conflict between 2 different people, such as a mech suit and a creature here, they really do tend to put a lot of emphasis on the nature world of Pandora itself. That was something that when they first announced the Avatar theme, I knew was going to be absolutely necessary in portraying the look and feel of the environment, but I never really expected them to actually put in a full-on location type build in every single set, even if the set honestly probably would have been fine without it, and in any other LEGO theme probably wouldn't have this. You can probably imagine that if you just remove this, this is a very realistic LEGO set of a creature facing off against some sort of a mech, or maybe a creature versus a creature, something like this. This would have been a good $25 to $30 pack. But by adding in the foliage, you actually do have a setting for all of the action to take place, which I think is especially cool. Now, one thing that's special for all of these Avatar sets, and we'll be taking a look at much of the other foliage later on in the rest of the video and in the other videos, but they actually introduced a couple of glow-in-the-dark elements to represent some of the glowing parts of Avatar's flora and fauna. Now, specifically, they recolored this crown element to be glow-in-the-dark, as well as the carrot stem, which, oops, knocked off a tree right there, but as well as the carrot stem in the back is glow-in-the-dark as well, which you can see right there. Everything else is pretty much just in colors you would expect. There are some interesting new recolors here, but for the most part, these are just being built up of standard LEGO pieces, and I just think it's really cool just seeing the sheer variety in different parts. From transparent green meteors, which actually were introduced in Ninjago's Skull Sorcerer-like sets for the transparent green rocks here. They're being reused as some sort of bulbs for plants. You have some of the elephant trunks and tail pieces being used as the foliage parts themselves, which we have seen before, but it is so cool to see that. Some of the blades from the LEGO Eternals sets, and of course the LEGO Ninjago Mare Guard swords as well, being used in dark red here to make up some of the vines. Now, One thing that is a little bit annoying about this is that you can see that pieces will just kind of come off of this. The foliage is not on there the strongest. They kind of do tend to have some sort of flimsy aspects of them, but I guess it kind of makes sense for something like this. It's more of a display piece rather than a play piece. Now, I want to focus again, continuing along with the nature theme, and taking a look at the Thanator animal itself. This animal to me is very, very reminiscent of the types of animals that we would get with LEGO elves, and honestly this entire theme kind of feels reminiscent of elves if you just threw in some of the military vehicles as well. And that's both a good thing and a bad thing. LEGO elves, in my opinion, is one of the most underrated LEGO themes. It was one of my favorites when it was first coming out. It lasted longer than the typical 3-year cycle for a LEGO theme, so it absolutely did pretty well, and I just kind of wish they still had some sort of fantasy option that was geared towards girls, but also was pretty open to all ages by having some really nice landscapes as well as creatures and builds, all to reflect a fantasy world. And this does so pretty well as well. That being said, there were a lot of drawbacks in the way that the elves' creatures were made, and this is pretty much having a lot of those same drawbacks. As you can see here, the way that the legs are mounted are actually on mixel joints, which you would think is good to provide a lot of motion, but the way it's set up is that the mixel joints are only used to be able to rotate it back and forth like this. Essentially, it'd be the same as using a Technic pin to attach these, except it just has a little bit more friction, whereas I probably would prefer to actually being able to, say, have these mounted just a couple of studs out so you can actually get this in more dynamic poses, and maybe splay the legs outwards. As it is right now, it feels pretty stiff when you're looking at it just from the front. There is no way to actually have the legs be splayed outwards other than, well, breaking it off like I did just there, and I really would have preferred seeing just a little bit more articulation. Now, initially when I was seeing the set, I wasn't super convinced in the way that the animal head mold was made, but I actually rewatched the Avatar movie right before reviewing all these sets, and to be honest, it looked a little bit jank in the movie as well. This is a pretty good representation of what it looked like. Obviously, this was back in 2009 when CGI just really wasn't up to today's standards, and so you kind of have this weird, fleshy mass of a head here. I'm not the biggest fan of the way the head mold turned out, but I will have to say it certainly is very, very accurate. This does look a lot like how the creature looked like in the movie itself. And it's cool that you actually have the snapping motion, although you can only snap it on 2 different hinge points. Now, in terms of the way that figures attach, you actually have the cords back here, which are a brand new piece introduced for Avatar to plug into the hair of each figure, which I think is really cool. And again, we will be taking a closer look at all of the figures later on, but I find it interesting how this basically depicts one of the final scenes of the movie, which is the final showdown between the villain and the heroes, but is one of these smaller sets, whereas some of the other sets focus on earlier parts of the movie itself. One other thing, just a last note that I have to say about the creature and the foliage is that it's really cool because it actually does have a stand on the pieces of nature landscaping itself. If we rotate this around, you may notice that this flower is very conveniently placed to actually just mount this right here and have it almost leaping into action. So you can have the mouth open like so and have it just going into action like that. It really does add a lot to this diorama and makes it feel like it's coming alive and in action, which is really cool. Now, moving on to the AMP suit, and honestly, this is probably one of my favorite things about the set. They basically perfected the Ninjago core mech design, which was introduced earlier this year for the January 2022 LEGO Ninjago sets, but instead of just having the standard fixed limbs for both the knees and the elbows, they actually went with smaller mixel joints for the elbows, allowing for better articulation on the mech itself, as well as full-on articulation even where the fingers are concerned, so you can move each of the individual fingers, which I think is really cool. Now, there is one major omission to this set, and LEGO designers actually did publicly address this. If anyone's seen the movie, you know that the AMP suits did not wield massive oversized chainsaws, although honestly that's pretty on brand for them. Instead, they wielded massive machine guns. This long machete knife-like piece is accurate, they did actually wield this in the movies, but the main weapons that all of these suits used were massive brick-built machine guns, which LEGO actually stated they did not want to lean too much into modern military-like stuff for Avatar. They specifically stated that they wanted the focus to be on the nature aspect of the sets themselves, but they did have to include some sort of military vehicles as well because they are very iconic parts of Avatar, so instead of including the massive machine gun, which probably would have been brick built, and maybe LEGO wasn't super comfortable making a large machine gun being used as a LEGO toy. They instead just gave him a massive chainsaw. So I don't really know how I feel about this. I guess there were some spikes on the end of his gun, so you can kind of pretend that this is just the end of it, but it is a very obnoxious yellow color, which I guess does fit in with some of the color scheme choices being used for other Avatar-related stuff. I feel like the balance just isn't quite right for this yellow chainsaw, though. Now that being said, this is LEGO, and one of the best parts about LEGO is that if you don't like something or feel like something's missing, you can just build it yourself. Sure, it would have been really nice to actually get the machine gun in the box itself, although I understand how LEGO has kind of gotten a little bit more careful in terms of depicting modern warfare in sets nowadays. If you were to make these sets maybe around 2006, 2007, back when there was Dino Attack and we had Exoforce, where LEGO was making brick-built flamethrowers and machine guns and war helicopters and tanks all the time, that's a different story. But it's 2022, LEGO is a lot tighter in terms of what they depict in sets, so I understand the compromise, even though it is a little bit disappointing not to see their signature weapon being used. That being said, this is a really fun model to pose around. As you can see, you have a good amount of articulation on the legs. It is a little bit restricted. This is about as much as you can get, but you really don't need that much more. This is really the craziest pose that you're ever going to need for the mech itself. The feet were constructed pretty interestingly because they don't actually attach from the front and back. This is literally just, I actually thought this was unfinished at first, just a 1x1 Technic brick being used on the back here, but surprisingly it works out pretty well, and you actually do have a good range of motion here where you can kind of rotate it all around. If you want the joint to kind of sit at a certain point, you can specifically choose where you want the joint to sit to really just get a completely different look and feel for the model itself, which I think is pretty cool. The one downside, though, is that when moving around the legs, it does tend to split open quite a lot. I think this is kind of a result of the limited articulation by the time you're actually moving the legs upwards. They tried to limit it such that they wouldn't have the mech falling over, but now that just causes it that whenever you move the legs, things will kind of tend to split open. But that is as easy as just kind of pushing it back together. It is kind of annoying, though. The arms, I have no complaints. You have pretty much perfect amounts of articulation on the arms themselves. The fingers are great to see, and of course you can open up the cockpit and remove the pilot himself to just have this as an empty docked suit as well. Now, talking about the set as a whole, to me, this set is honestly one of the weaker Avatar sets, and there's a couple reasons for that. For instance, you can see that I actually do really like the way the mech is built, but there are a lot of drawbacks to the design itself. Due to LEGO's policy in terms of not depicting modern weapons, they did not want to give him a very iconic weapon used in the film, and the animal has a lot of cons to it. Despite being a good and solid build, I definitely would have wanted more articulation out of the front legs. The head sculpt, while accurate to the movie, still feels a little bit non-LEGO-like to me. It's just kind of weird in how smooth it is, I think, and all in all, this kind of feels like a set that maybe would have come out a few years ago, back when LEGO building techniques weren't quite as refined. The foliage pieces are great, but they do fall off really easily. I definitely would have preferred them to actually be stuck in 1x1 hollow studs instead of just stuck in the R2-D2 dome elements there. And this honestly doesn't offer too much unique stuff for a particular Avatar set. That being said, if this was one of the only sets you were going to get from the theme, I think it provides a pretty decent balance between a nature-like creature, an actual nature build, which you can see there for the foliage and the plants of the jungle, and a military-like build. It's one of the only sets that has pretty much a slice of everything that you would see out of the Avatar theme. So while I don't think this is one of the more interesting Avatar sets, it's kind of ironic in that if you had to pick only one Avatar set to get and wanted the most variety, I probably would recommend this because you get a creature, you get the plants, and you get a military vehicle. Whereas most other sets are either just focused on the creatures and plants, or just focused on a vehicle and some of the more military stuff. There isn't really a good balance or a battle set like we're getting here, so I definitely would recommend it for that reason. Here are the minifigures of set number 75571, Neytiri and Thanator vs. AMP suit Quaritch. It provides a fairly decent selection for being a smaller size set at only $45, featuring one of the actual native Pandorans as well as a standard LEGO human character, who's actually one of the only villain characters that we got out of the entire Avatar wave of sets. We really only got the main characters and the heroes, and this was pretty much just the only villain representation we got, which is both good and bad. that, because I think it's a pretty decent figure, but I definitely would have wanted to see a little bit more in terms of the conflict between humans and the natives, because I think that just provides a lot more play patterns in terms of the sets themselves, rather than just having every single one be focused on the heroes, which honestly is kind of a problem a lot of modern LEGO themes are facing. Like Ninjago, for instance, focuses so much on the heroes and not a ton on the villains. But speaking of the figures themselves, this is the first time I'm talking about one of these newer style Avatar Pandoran figures, and man, were they controversial. So first things first, obviously this is a lot taller than the standard LEGO minifigure. The top of this figure really just only goes up to the neck of this one, and they actually reused some older molds for these. They technically updated them, but they are basically the same exact molds that were introduced back in 2011 for the LEGO Toy Story sets for Woody and Jessie. These are the longer legs, which you can see right here, and the longer arms to fit them. Avatar also introduced a brand new head mold, which you can see right here. This is exactly what the headpiece looks like for the Avatar characters, which is somewhat reminiscent of the minifigure, but obviously has a lot more shaping and has the ears sticking out of the sides. They also introduced a set of new hair pieces with bars on the ends to interface with the creatures, as well as a brand new piece for the tails themselves. This is a longer tail than we are typically used to. It is very similar to ones that we saw for the collectible minifigures like the mouse from the Looney Tunes series and stuff like that, but it's in a brand new color for the first time in this kind of medium blue color, and all in all, I would say that these figures are pretty accurate to the source material. But are they LEGO-fied enough? Now, honestly, it kind of goes back and forth for me in particular. I definitely really do like the amount of attention to detail paid for the design of the characters themselves, from the metallic body paint here. This is the particular outfit Neytiri wore near the end of the film, so it's really cool to actually see some metallic face paint and designs there. I honestly just feel like if these figures had standard minifigure heads, but then you would miss out on the ears. So I don't know, I'm trying to figure out, there's something about them that just isn't quite right to me personally. I think they're quite good, they could be a lot better though. Don't really have a problem with the longer limbs, but maybe it's the head and the way the noses are printed. It does feel a little bit uncanny to see a nose on a LEGO minifigure, especially because minifigures typically don't have noses unless they were part of the Native Americans line back in 1990s when LEGO was doing Western stuff, or maybe Voldemort has his two nose slits, but for the most part minifigs don't typically have noses. And it does feel a little bit strange to see her next to a standard minifigure, who definitely does feel like a just regular minifigure type of build, compared to exactly what you can see with this right here. That being said, I definitely do not have as many complaints as many others do. I'm pretty happy with them, and if they just stuck to this, I don't think I would have that many complaints. I think it's alright, it probably could have been a little bit better, but it's good for what it is, and I really, really love that they brought back the older molds for Woody. I never in a million years would have expected LEGO to actually bring back the longer limbs. That was pretty crazy to me. Certainly did not expect that, but I am certainly very, very happy they did, and hope that these get used for more figures in the future. I saw on Discord someone actually posted a mock-up of what Chewbacca from Star Wars would look like with the longer legs and arms, and I think it actually works out really well. I hope that LEGO uses these for remarkably taller characters in the future, especially when translating media together, and I just think the minifigures are pretty good altogether. Moving on to Quaritch here. He's a pretty standard minifigure, but one thing I do like is that this year in 2022, they actually managed to recolor the Ninjago movie Zane hairpiece in two different new colors, black for M'Baku from the Black Panther 2 line, and now in gray for Quaritch here, which I think fits his particular military-style haircut perfectly. This also is just a really good military outfit in general. It does feel a little bit cartoonish to me, or maybe a little bit too cartoony LEGO-fied in terms of having the camouflage just being very, very large and blocky. LEGO has done a couple of military-like stuff in the past, but this is really the probably closest we are getting to a standard military outfit. The undershirt is just a plain teal, which I probably would have preferred having a little bit more detail. That being said, the graphic design for the characters across the entire line is pretty consistent. They're not superly over-detailed, but they're not under-detailed either. And as long as they're consistent, that's fine with me. But with that, I think we can now move on to the rest of the stuff. With that, we have summed up our review of set number 75571. Of course, stay tuned to the channel for more reviews of the Avatar sets coming your way very, very soon. Again, all culminating in a mega review, where I include all the review footage of all these individual reviews, plus give my thoughts on the wave as a whole, and combine them, because one of the coolest things about the Avatar sets is that all of the foliage pieces actually are built to combine with the others. So that is a very interesting display to have. I can't wait to showcase that. And of course, let me know down in the comments below, what do you think of the set? Do you like it? Do you dislike it? And do you own it yourselves? And if so, what has been your experience putting this together? With that, thanks all so much. Like and subscribe for even more LEGO news, reviews, discussion, and analyses coming your way very soon. Thanks, and bye for now.